Yeah, thanks for joining us today for our Friday 5 Live conversation. Glad to have you all with us. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, just feel free to use the chat feature. And if you're comfortable sharing your messages with everybody, if you could please select all panelists and attendees. And then we will be sharing the recording with everybody. If you're a GoToKnowledge member, it will be on your dashboard, and otherwise it will be emailed to you. And our host today is Meg Foster. Meg has spent 20 years in higher education focused on student success initiatives and working in areas such as orientation, faculty development, online learning, student leadership, and first-year initiatives. And Meg, I will pass it over to you now.
Thank you, Melissa. It's always so great. It's good to be back. We took a little bit of a break, around the July 4th holiday. So it's, and I hope many of you all got a chance to rest and renew it. And we spent the month of June really focused, Jean, on our staff and how we can be mentally healthy and kind of recover from this year. And our last podcast, we talked about making that transition back to campus if for folks who are returning back to a building, and lots of advice ranging from things like make sure you pack enough water the first day, because you've gotten used to wearing comfy shoes and having lots of snacks at your disposal and things like that. So that was a fantastic conversation, and I'm really excited to spend this month of July having conversations with you about how we can prepare for our students for the fall semester. I think every day as I'm reading news in the world of education, and really that's kind of at all levels. I certainly focus on higher ed, but I am attuned. You're a parent of 4, I think, if I remember correctly. I bow down. I have 3. We just think 4 takes you to this whole place that I'm just in awe of. But I think because I've got children who are in K-12 education, I'm always tuned to that as well, right? What's going on in our K-12 systems, and I think those national discussions. I mean, just this week I saw I read 12 articles about the concern around learning loss, particularly geared around math and science, as we're having students come out of the high school setting, entering our college environments who may have not been physically in a classroom now for 18 months, even our current college students, right? So excited about what we're going to learn today, and also excited about our conversation in 2 weeks. Just as a quick housekeeping item before we introduce Jean, we love hearing from our audience, and I always provide some questions to guide our conversations, but would love to hear your questions too. So don't hesitate to use that chat feature. If you select all panelists and attendees, we can all read and hear your questions. And Jean, you don't have to worry about the questions because my job is to weave those into our conversation. Perfect. So yeah, I do that work. So we are so fortunate to have Jean Mandernach with us. And Jean, you've really focused in your work at Grand Canyon University, from my understanding, on research and teaching. You're really an expert on online education. I know I work with somebody who's quite the Jean groupie, and really follows all professional development that you provide, because it's such rich and robust content around how we can build out learning opportunities online that are really going to help our students. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure what is going on with my video, but Zoom has just not been my friend in the last couple of last week. So I apologize for that.
Zoom is even having Zoom fatigue. I think not just us, Zoom is tired. Yeah.
Oh, we're all tired. And I think that's actually an upcoming webinar that Innovative Educators is doing, is on handling Zoom fatigue. So Jean, I apologize that the video has turned off, and hopefully it will decide to resurrect itself here in a little bit. But you come to us with such, an eye for what's going on in our world of higher education and how we can really impact student learning. And as you and I kind of went back and forth talking about this topic, we really mentioned that at all levels, we're concerned about this concept of learning loss. And I know I've read some things that have kind of kicked around the idea of, why are we really, is this a legitimate concern? I certainly think it is, just from the own experience that I've seen with the students I teach and the students I live with. And you've been great about providing us in our presentation slides here, and which Melissa will put out for everybody. We are fortunate to have with us, Jean's pulled together a lot of resources for us. And I know you had mentioned that those might be geared, some of that research might be more geared towards a K-12 audience, but I think that's just incredibly valuable. I think we often learn from our K-12 colleagues, innovations and intervention strategies. And I think it's helpful if we know what's going on at those levels, because ultimately those are the students who end up in our classrooms. So, so to kick off kind of our questions, you know, as we think about this last year of teaching online, and holy moly, I mean, what in 18 months. I mean, we had faculty who've been doing this forever. We had faculty who were like, in 2 weeks, you're now going to be an expert in online education. What are some of the skills? I want to focus on some of the positives we're seeing. You know, what are some of the skills that we are seeing students kind of gaining from this pandemic learning experience? And we'd love to hear what you're seeing.
Like you said, it's so funny. Whenever we mention the pandemic, all we want to talk about is the negatives. And, you know, we were forced out of the classroom and we were forced to go remote and all the challenges that have been associated, but we overcame them. So by default, the fact that our students and our faculty and all the support services rose up means we're all leaving with skill sets that we didn't have before. And I think if we really focus on the students, I don't know if it's the skills per se. Oftentimes we hear people say, oh, the technology skills. Well, our students had technology skills, probably better than we did. But what I think they gained was intentional use of those technology skills. They always ran their phone. They always could, you know, hop on, click a link, do the webcam, turn on their video, TikToks, you name it. But now they can figure out like, oh man, I need to access this class and I am having internet issues. You know, you and I both today have struggled with internet issues. And I think pre-pandemic, that may have resulted in a, oh, well, I guess I'm having internet issues, I can't make it. And our students have become so resilient that now they've gone, oh, I couldn't get in with my computer, let me try with my phone. Oh, I'm having trouble on Wi-Fi, let me try a hotspot. Oh, I can't get it here, I'm gonna drive somewhere where I can pick up a better signal. So it's not the technology per se, but it's almost the philosophy and the resilience that came with that philosophy, that technology was now going to be this multifaceted tool that we would use however we needed to use it to get to the end goal. And so I don't know that I would say they gained technology skills, but they gained resilient use of those and intentional use. And then related to that is just that philosophy. I think our students now are coming to us with a much more, I don't even quite know the word for it, is an enabled, empowered kind of a viewpoint. I think if I reflect back, let's pretend we're looking 2 years ago. Students were pretty comfortable with the idea that a college education was them showing up in class and the professor would do the work and give them the lecture and provide them some lecture outlines. And then they just had to receive that. And then if they missed class, they would go, you know, maybe on the LMS and they would still just wait to receive what was given to them. And I think the entire philosophy has changed. Students started reaching out and they started saying, hey, I need more help. I'm not understanding. I can't access that. That doesn't make sense to me. And so it's not so much that we can say, you know, they got better at X, but they got empowered to be advocates for themselves and to really engage in their own education. Like, I feel like they're no longer passive recipients of their education, but they're willing to dive in and direct it and guide it and ask questions and be problem solvers in a way that we didn't see a couple years ago.
I really love that. And Jean, just so you know, I take copious notes as we talk. So I really love this idea of, and I've certainly seen this play out with my own students, that you're right, they had to step up, right? They had to learn how to communicate in a different way because everything was online and there wasn't the opportunity to be face to face with somebody where your faculty member can look at you and say, oh, well, right, I can read in your eyes that you don't get it. That the students then had to, and I think that we've seen that really at so many levels.
Right.
That
I was actually talking to a faculty group the other day, and it was kind of the downtime buzz when people are just chit-chatting. And one of the things they were all complaining about was that students had become so relaxed. And their example of students being so relaxed was that they were calling faculty by their first name. And in this particular faculty group, that drove them absolutely crazy. The idea that students were being informal with them and calling them their first name. And so as we came back, and regathered and convened, I said to the group, I understand why people have some desire to use a title that they're preferred and respected. I get that. But let's just think of the other end as well. Perhaps students are using our first name because they finally feel connected with us in a way they haven't felt connected before, and feel perhaps that now we're a team working together, which I think is a much more pleasant view of education. And so I said, even though I understand you can still absolutely request that students call you something different, let's not assume them calling us by our first name, which they maybe didn't do as much a couple of years ago, is a bad sign. I think it's actually an indicator of some really good shifts in just the philosophy of how they're approaching their own education.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've had some great chatter here about, Lucy shared that the pandemic and its challenges to learning really provided students with the opportunity to practice, critical thinking skills about how am I going to connect with resources and being aware of resources. And we've had another comment around, this idea of constructivist education, which I've recently kind of done some diving into about, kind of co-creating the course with our students, which is so powerful when they have that ownership in their own educational experience and that investment in it. We really do see that shift in students not sitting there passively kind of waiting, oh, pour the knowledge into me. And we know, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we know that that's what our workforce is looking for. Right. Our employers want to find students who have critical thinking skills, who can work in group situations, who can be resilient. It's a lot of the research that I've seen. And so I love looking at what has happened in this last 18 months or so through this lens of how our students have grown. And I like your focus, Jean, that it's not just tech skills. Like, it is great. I love Jamboard. I understand you're a huge Jamboard fan. And yes. I love that my second grader, rising third grader, can do a Jamboard. And I've taught with a lot of Jamboards, but it's more than that. It's the problem solving process.
Well, and it's, I think, their belief, some new technology my faculty member threw at me. Okay, like I can learn it, so it's that empowered philosophy. I even had a student recently that was like, I did not understand. One of the classes I teach is advanced doctoral stats. As you can imagine, students all hate it. They struggle. They're challenged by it. And one of my students reached out and said, I totally didn't understand your screencast. And so I found this other one on YouTube that was much clearer than what you said. And I think the student actually was frustrated and trying to kind of maybe perhaps passive aggressively criticize my teaching. But on the flip side, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You didn't watch it and say, I'm so frustrated, I don't get this, I give up. They watched it. They said, I don't get what Jean is saying. I'm going to go look on YouTube for one that I get. And then when they shared that back to me, I actually took that and I put it back in the course. And I said, hey, everyone, this student found this other resource that explains it much more clearly than I was able to. I want to give this back to all of you. And then the student reached out to me and was like, oh, thanks. I didn't realize other people would love it. But just that philosophy that we're all in this together. And as faculty, we're not perfect either. And if we can tap into this and use this as we're all, as it was said in the chat, co-constructing this together, it absolutely changes everything about the teaching and learning dynamic.
I really love that. So as we also think about, our students, so thinking about our students and what they've learned this year, Um, Also curious what you think about where our students are going to need more support. You know, so many of us are moving back towards campus reopenings this fall. Um, our campus opens August 2nd for, folks to return to campus. And just curious, what are there some big areas that you're like, oh, we all need to be prepared? Day one, have your plan.
Well, I think yes. The short answer, yes. Yes, there is. The longer answer is I think there's actually like a couple different buckets of that we have to look at. One, I think students need more support on what it means to be a campus-based student again. I mean, if we really start to think about our student population, almost 50% of our undergraduate student population, or if you're at a four-year school, or 100% if you're at a community college, is really going to be relatively new to campus teaching. So it's no longer freshman orientation. It's
Right.
literally like return to campus learning orientation. And what are those expectations? Because I'm not even sure that our pre-pandemic expectations apply anymore. So I don't think we can necessarily pull out, the one we used back in 2018 or 2019 and use that student orientation as we're thinking about coming to school this fall. Because students have changed, faculty has changed. I think the general understanding of higher ed has started to change. I predict we're almost never again going to see traditional office hours. And if we think back to historic student orientations, we'd be like, go to their office, take advantage of their office hours, walk in. I think that's probably gone. But what's not gone is you need to proactively connect with your professor. You need to take advantage of opportunities. We need to reteach them the new campus expectations. And along with that, what does it mean to attend a live class? What does it mean to be engaged when you're in that class? Because if we think when the pandemic hit, students that are now going to be juniors in college have really only done like one semester of campus learning. And most of us consider that first freshman semester kind of a wash. Like it's the ugly semester where they're just trying to remember to feed themselves and sleep and all those, life skills. Well, then they started to do that. And by the beginning of their second semester of their freshman year, they were back home. And then they often spent most of their sophomore year, depending on where they were at geographically in the US, back home. And so they could be juniors and for the first time ever, really having to like figure out how to connect with campus resources and in-campus classes and figuring out that whole, yes, there are expectations now that we're back on campus for attendance and things like that. So I think one bucket where they need more support is literally like how to be a student again, because it's changed. Another story related to that, I had a faculty member say, that they went back just barely at the end of this last spring. So students had been remote for a full year. And when they went back, their email was just flooded with students saying, well, I think I'm just going to be online. I don't think I'm going to come in physically. Where's the link for the class? I'm just going to attend via remote. And the faculty member was like, wait, that's not how this works anymore. And so I think we even need to like set expectations and talk to them about expectations and communication. If the university is still high flex, we'd want to teach them, how do you use that effectively? How do you decide when you should be in class and when you should be remote? What's important? How do you learn best? How, do your preferences align with what's going to be the best way to help you move forward academically? Because the majority of our college students haven't been in that context for quite a while now. And then add into that, the incoming, high school seniors coming for the first time, they may not have been in a physical classroom now for a year and a half. So that whole idea of like, not only am I transitioning to school, but I'm transitioning back to a classroom that I haven't been in since the middle of my junior year of high school. So I just think we have such variability that we need to be a lot more dedicated when we start thinking about orientations. It's not just new student orientation. It's really welcome back to campus orientation. And if they happen to be a freshman, it might include a little heavier on that, life skills kind of stuff that they need. But even if they're a sophomore or a junior, they're really going to need a little bit more like Let's get back on the right mindset and let's make sure we're all on the same page of how this is going to work. And then there's that whole other bucket. We used to, call it the summer slide or the learning loss. I've heard other people calling it now the COVID crash.
No.
What do we do about the actual cognitive learning gaps that we're going to have? And the research tells us, this is kind of jumping to your second question that's on the screen here, but the research tells us like, yes, there's learning loss. Now, most of that research is coming K-12 because they're the ones historically that have a nice building curriculum, whereas in college, we're a little more varied with how we see students picking and choosing their classes. But if we look at the K-12 stuff, because let's face it, those are our next students, what they're saying is for your average middle class white student, they're behind on the learning that they're bringing with them into college about 4 to 6 months. So really they're a semester behind of what we used to be able to anticipate our students were coming with. And what's really troubling is there's a disproportionate learning loss for low SES and minorities. And they're saying they're up to 12, more like 8 to 12 months behind in their learning, simply because their access to the resources when things went remote were disproportionately bad. So it's not just a matter of do they need more support? Overwhelmingly, yes, but we also have different populations needing disproportionate amounts of support because they're coming in with such wide variability.
And I'm really seeing some very interesting conversation about institutions, that are trying to maximize some of the federal dollars, funds that are out there, and creating some things like mandatory tutoring, which they've never done before, right? Like, congratulations, you are here with us. We are super excited. Here is your math tutor.
Right.
You will meet every week at this time in a small group. And, and I think it's really important. Beth has made a comment in our chat about, she's working orientation with occupational therapy assistant students, and how just reminding them to rethink about what it is to be a kind of a student again, right? But also thinking about what are things we can put in place at our institutions proactively, so that we can anticipate, we have, and I'm thinking about some of the folks who are, we're listening in today who are in, TRIO programs, that, those are populations. They may be seeing these students if they're coming in with, 6 to 12 months, kind of a shift behind, or 8 to 12, you said, behind where they would normally be. What can we do now to be thoughtful about that, so it's not a surprise to our system, right? Because I'm sure you've seen that there was some statistics posted in the last 10 days or so about the drop in persistence for students from fall 2019 to fall 2020. Biggest drop in persistence, of course, was at our community colleges, not surprisingly, and specifically with our students of color. So concerned about holding on to those populations. Is there anything you're seeing, just kind of, so it sounds like the answer to number 2 is a simple kind of yes. Yes.
There is learning loss, and it's bigger in areas. So if we think college as opposed to high school, as you already mentioned, it's biggest in the math and science as well as English. So even if we think about, we all are pressed for support, time, and resources. So if push comes to shove and we have to really prioritize from a content or disciplinary area, what should we focus most on? We really should focus on those areas that are core and foundational across the curriculum, which tends to be our math and English, as well as getting some of those building areas, which tends to be our science a little more so, and really getting in there early in those. So if your institution is like, we realize everybody needs support, where do we start? Start in math, English, and science. Those are the areas to really prioritize. And then within that, thinking about which are the areas that are absolutely foundational for all prerequisites. The other thing that the research is telling us is that we have a lot of students coming in now with kind of this fluff GPA and Swiss cheese background, because what happened was everybody went remote, teachers weren't prepared, nobody felt comfortable really failing students when it wasn't students' fault about their access and all those kind of things. And so we aren't really sure to what extent GPAs actually represent where students should be. So we don't even really know placement the way we used to. And we went test optional in many cases. So we don't have SATs, we don't have ACTs, we don't have placement tests. And we're fairly concerned there's some fluff GPA in there. Added to that, even the students that were fighting and earning it and don't have a fluff GPA per se, they're saying, they often have a Swiss cheese background. If they really didn't get an area, they might have been able to just kind of ignore that, leave a hole, and fill in the other areas strong enough to go ahead and bring their grade up to a passing level. So even when we think about these foundational courses, we can't rely like we have historically on placements and grades and things like that. So we might have to be a little more intentional early on in our courses and just do our best guess. I mean, what math course should they be in? We don't really know. But we should probably then go into those math courses and try to get some really early on assessments so that if we have them in the wrong place and they need additional support, we can do that very early before we, wait like we normally do till the end of the semester, then we have a fail and then we get them into remedial. Too late. So we might even have to rethink our curriculum to get the data that doesn't exist to more effectively serve our students.
This is just such a timely conversation. And I'm thinking about, what my own experience at home. You've got 4 children who've gone through the educational system this year. I have 3 at home, and I love the Swiss cheese. And I have a very grumpy 7th grader whose mother is forcing him to take an online summer math bridging program because it's very obvious that there was just not a whole lot of math learning that went on this year. And we've got a great comment here about, considering how we're going to build in additional workshops. And I know traditionally, in my work with faculty, particularly online, it's a struggle because there's so much content that I know it's hard for us to ask faculty to take some time out for orientation and training activities. But I do think that it is going to be important that we spend some time this year in our classes very intentionally, making sure students are pointed in the direction of support resources, making sure that they feel that they can all name kind of who their person is, right? Who they're going to go to day one. If they, here's your identified individual, and if you're struggling, we are here for you and we care about you, making sure our students hear those messages over and over and over again.
Well, and even jumping back to what you mentioned earlier, that some institutions are going to this like mandatory tutoring. Well, a modification of that mandatory tutoring is we're now putting students that have succeeded in the courses back in the courses, assigning them their little mandatory tutor groups, and then actually equipping those student tutors with the skills to say, this one's good, they can move on, this one needs a little more help, because the faculty are overwhelmed. And many people in support services know you can have, the early alert programs and assign them up for tutoring and let us know they need help. And if faculty don't take the time to take advantage of those programs, you don't benefit at all because you don't have a way to find those students. And so looking at some of those student tutorings, the one-on-one tutorings, the using other resources, and in many cases, it's kind of unconventional resources. There's a huge push to start using a lot more data analytics. We know the faculty are overwhelmed. We know it's not always feasible to get, a huge number of tutors and student tutors organized and in the course. But now we're in a position more than ever before that faculty are using the learning management systems. This is another benefit of the COVID era. They moved to it, and now research is telling us overwhelmingly they're at least going to still use them as a foundation for their courses, even if they're back face-to-face. Definitely if they're hybrid, high flex, or some other blended model, but definitely using a learning management in some way. Well, what I love about the learning management systems is the analytics are built in, it's automatic. So now as institutions, we can start saying things like, faculty, we know you're overwhelmed. We don't need you to fill out reports for us and to submit names and to do all that. But what we do need you to do is integrate a few early things, early assignments, benchmarks. Maybe it's a quiz, maybe it's a prep thing. Integrate them early, put them in your learning management system, and we can now design systems to where, you know, the CRM or XRM, whatever you use, management system at the school, can talk to the LMS, and it can automatically start sending us early alerts. Same thing for attendance. If we can just get faculty to record attendance in the learning management system, that can be triggered directly back, automated, back to the support services. So we can actually kind of take faculty out of the equation. And so sometimes supporting the students better might be automating the processes so we're no longer relying on humans, because us humans fail and we run out of time and best intentions go awry. Right. But analytics don't. They're very consistent. And so we haven't really even started tapping into how we can use analytics to guide really effective and efficient use of our support services. So we know we're targeting the students for what they need, where they need it, and not kind of throwing out the big umbrella and hoping we catch the ones that need it.
Right, right. I think that's, you know, I've certainly seen, there have been some really impressive programs in some community colleges to really hone in on this idea of data and like, how are we examining the data and then being very intentional about responses to that. And I think that's the key piece is, you know, if we're not acting on it, then it just kind of sits there and it doesn't do much. But if we've got these systems in place that we say, okay, you know, student is not attending or student is not submitting work, and that's getting, then there's that flag that goes up. But then how can we make those processes? Because if we're relying on a person then, and we're also overwhelmed, right? I think about my wonderful student support colleagues who I worry about, and know that, you know, if it could be as easy as sending some sort of electronic nudge, you know, then that makes a huge difference in getting a message out to a student in a timely fashion, right? Because there are simply not enough. I know we've got an advisor or two on our call today, and I know oftentimes the number of students that we're working with are just a single institution, right? Your caseload could be its own separate college or university. And so that's just not practical. So I would love to know, Green Canyon, do you have these kinds of processes in place? Or are there institutions that you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so has really got a hold of this and is doing a great job and would be an excellent kind of example or use case?
We do, and I can give you other institutions that have good examples. I think the institutions now that we can actually look toward for some guidance on the use of analytics are the ones that have both an online and a campus presence. Because generally the fact that they had a fairly established online program is an indicator that they were already tapping into analytics before COVID hit. And then what happened at Grand Canyon and many other places I've talked with is they started saying, oh, wow, now that everybody went remote, we really need to use those same processes we used to be using online to help our campus students. So for example, at Grand Canyon, it's automated in the system that when students haven't attended certain number of times, it will start by an automated message to the student, which we've done research to make sure we're wording it super careful, that sounds very personalized and supportive. But also right in that message is like, hey, you know, you missed a couple classes, and it tells which classes they missed. And we're really worried about you. You know, are you sick? Do you need somebody to look in on you? Are things going okay? Are you overwhelmed? Reach out now before it's too late. Here's your best steps to get back on track. And so then it will put them in touch with their academic counselor. It will automatically put in the faculty information, and it will give them an action plan. Well, then the analytics keep track of that then. And if the student then doesn't do anything, it will start triggering a, hey, you know, notice you still haven't done this. And only after the first round, then does it also trigger a reminder to the faculty that says, the student isn't doing much, maybe it would help if you did a personal reach out. It will also trigger one to their academic advisor to do a reach out, or their academic counselor, excuse me. So in our case, we've really done a lot tapping into just their attendance and engagement. Other areas have gotten a whole lot better, even tapping into like grade indicators. So faculty will be able to designate that this is an assignment that will tell us how a student is doing. And from that assignment, particularly like in math courses, from that assignment, it can automatically trigger and say, okay, students that performed at this level because of these questions, they need this support. And then it reaches out to a tutor to say, here's specifically what they're missing and what they need help on. So that tutor doesn't even have to rely on the student's ability to say, here's what I'm struggling with. Because often when they're struggling, they don't know what they're struggling with. They come and they say, I'm confused, I'm lost, I don't know what to do. Well, now the tutor can be much more intentional because the tutor knows exactly what they're struggling with. And so I think the more we can pinpoint, the more efficient we can become, but we can also automate a lot of those middle steps so that the valuable human resources that we need don't have to waste time on administrative processes. They can actually spend their time working with students.
I think that's so, I love this idea of triggering an assignment to set, and I'm now dying of curiosity. I'm going to go have to ask if our system is sophisticated enough to allow us to do that, because you're right. So often students, they know they're struggling, but they can't pinpoint what it is. Right. And then they're the deer in the headlights, right? I mean, how many times have we seen, I'm just overwhelmed and I can't even begin to articulate what it is that has me overwhelmed, and those next steps. And then I think that allows that opening for whoever the support system is, whether it's your advisor, whether it's your tutor, whether it's your supplemental instruction, to say, you know, okay, so this is a struggle. Here are some common things we have. See, here are some tools. I mean, I'm even noting with my students who have been now out of that learning environment for so long, they don't know how to take notes, right? Like these things that we assume, right, perhaps incorrectly, that somewhere along the way you've had some note-taking instruction or some study skills instruction. Maybe that got lost along the way, or not communicated in a way that was effective. And so you can really put those very tangible call to action. Here is something we can do. And we're going to break this down into small steps. As my brother-in-law says, you don't eat the elephant all in one bite, right? So here are your small bites.
Most of our students just stand there looking at the elephant because they don't even have a clue. Yeah.
Right. They're just staring, hoping they don't get trampled. Ryan has asked some great questions about if there's a particular resource that would cite about some of the statistics you mentioned around students of color being 8 to 12 months, kind of behind in learning, and our other students 4 to 6 months, and COVID crash, is that something that has been used as a resource? So, and Jean has provided a lot of wonderful resources for us. You'll see those in our next couple of slides, linked to a lot.
Actually, the resource that I don't know if they coined the term COVID crash. I definitely did not. But I'm trying to think of the name of it, Academy Today. It's the Chronicle of Higher Education's newsletter. And it was literally maybe a month ago, their July article. I actually don't know that it's in my readings list. I should give it to you. But both of those statistics and kind of that term, the COVID crash, was in that newsletter. So let me see if I can, while we're online here, I'm just going to see if I can pull that up. It came from the newsletter from the Chronicle of Higher Education. But let me see if I can be more specific for that, Ryan, as we're sitting here chatting.
That's great, Jean. And we can always link as well out to things afterwards if as we wrap up our conversation. So what I hear is, so overall, yes, we know students are going to come to us with learning loss at all levels. I think there's been a lot of discussion, math and science, but I think you really bring up an important point that it's also happening in English reading, writing courses as well. And we know that then impacts, I'm a psychology student, I'm a sociology student, I'm a history, right? Like if our writing skills and reading skills aren't quite there, that's going to impact a lot of our courses. And thank you, Jean, for providing that article to us around the summer slide becoming the COVID crash. I would love to, and we've talked about some really practical things, that we can do as far as interventions and strategies, considering our orientation programming. You know, and maybe if we haven't planned something out formally, I did put in the chat, love to hear from folks who are on our call about what their institutions might be doing to kind of have an orientation for those upper level students who perhaps in the past we've not, you know, thought to formally orient to our institutions. But if folks have some things, but it's not too late, I guess is what I would say. If you're on the call and you're sort of panicking, I don't think it's too late to put together some strategies and some interventions that, okay, we come back to class August 20th, we're gonna have a major specific huddle, right, for all of our sophomores, juniors, and seniors in this, and let's talk about where you were and what we can do to support you moving forward, and a refresher to our student support services.
Well, the other thing I think tapping into that is, interestingly, the research, the just recent stuff coming into like, what do we do to support students this fall? It really is kind of indicating that even though a lot of places have kind of what we have traditionally thought of as the remedial courses and the transition and the bridge programs, they've actually shown lower than normal attendance this summer compared to what they normally have, despite the fact we know the need is higher.
Wow.
And they're attributing that to kind of this Zoom fatigue and this general, like, everybody's reaching out with all these remote opportunities. I'm completely overwhelmed with remote opportunities. So despite the fact that I know it would help me, I just can't do it right now. And so I think for schools that are saying, oh my gosh, we don't have all these remedial programs and we don't have the bridge program and I think you're good. You're maybe better than normal, because all the research is indicating that it appears, I mean, we're kind of guessing, let's face it, we're in a little bit of this weird black hole here. It appears that the best way to support these students is not to hold them back and have them do the remedial stuff and prep in advance. It's to try to add additional support to accelerate them and catch them up while they're in the courses. So they're talking about things like the one-on-one tutoring, the getting the tutoring into residence halls, adding the more targeted support within the class for the class, adding 1 credit supplemental courses for those students that need the extra support to be able to accelerate and catch up. But it's not really like, let's pull them out and try to catch them up in advance. It's let's try to accelerate their growth by adding additional support and guidance within the structure.
That's so fascinating. And I think that makes so much sense. I feel like students want it to be very relative to what, right? They want to be able to relate the supplemental opportunity to what they're currently learning versus having it be, oh, well, we're going to teach you whatever, note taking, or we're going to teach you some math skills, but it's not in that context, right, of the application of it. Right.
The whole, like, the mental, like, oh, I'm not good enough, I need remedial. Well, when we're already talking that it's disproportionately lower income and minority students, now to add this mindset to them isn't helping them to believe they can succeed. And so if we can accelerate them rather than put them remedial, not only does it help them academically, but it helps them psychologically, just to feel like they are capable.
So important. Well, we've got 1 minute left, Jean. This time went by so fast, and I feel so, I do really feel like very renewed as far as, all right, I'm going to get back in there academic coaching with my students here next month, working one-on-one. I'm excited to be back in person and not just doing this facilitated through a camera on my computer. But I'm taking notes and thinking about what are some intervention strategies I can do with my first year experience students right out of the gate, right? And such important conversation today. And I'm excited to then build on this when we gather again on July the 30th and really get to talk about the research you're doing around faculty expectations, right? And these concerns of, I'm certainly seeing that and feeling that. And then, as we know, often faculty expectations and student expectations are like, right, I don't even like the mountains and the desert, 2 very different things. Like apples and water are not even like carrots, because they're not even the same, yes, family. So so important. We've had some really great chat here too. I want to just acknowledge around the challenges that are taking place nationally, discussion around critical race theory. And that's certainly, you know, a really important topic, and one that we can weave into a future podcast discussion. Absolutely. So, so more to come on that. You know, we're always interested in hot topics and things that are timely conversations for us. So I could envision that being definitely a conversation we get into come August or September. Thank you, Jean, so much for everything that you shared today, for overcoming your tech challenge, for being willing to deal with the death of my video camera as we got started here. Just to remind folks, we do have a survey that pops up at the end, and it's always really helpful to know what kind of topics you would love for us to cover in future months. We're excited to get to gather with Jean again on July the 30th, and then hear from some students come August the 13th. So Jean, you've left us a lot to chew over. Hope, right? I mean, I think that there's some positive things that are coming out of this. And I'm reminded that I feel like this academic year is kind of a bridge year from what was last year and what will be kind of our new normal. Because I do think I'm totally on the Jean Mandernach board of education is shifting.
Yes.
And there's going to be long-term change as a result of the last 18 months. So.
Agreed. And I will leave one last nugget that we never wove in, but I think it's important to remember. We also have super successful students that are looking for opportunities to connect because they feel like they've missed 2 years of connection and service and resume building. So if you're looking at how do I tutor and add additional support, reaching out to our successful students may also help them, because now they can connect with us, they can start to build a resume, start to build skills, and they really do feel like they're missing out on opportunities that they didn't have for 2 years. So we might have a win-win there.
That's I think a great point. I mean, we're certainly seeing a lot of that kind of wanting to make up for lost time, if we can call it that. So great point. Well, Jean, thank you so much for being willing to spend your Friday morning with us. We're so grateful always for all the wisdom that you bring to us. And in our presentation, Melissa shared this with us. I just want to assure you, you'll be sent this, all of those great articles and resources that Jean was kind enough to pull together, and we'll put the Chronicle resource in here as well, Jean, and put that up.
I don't know why I didn't put that one in, because that one is actually specific to higher ed. It was probably the most relevant one, and I don't have it on the list, but if you didn't grab it in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, we will make sure we get that out to folks. Well, happy Friday, everyone. I hope everybody has an opportunity for rest and renewal this weekend. And Jean, I look forward to continuing our conversation on the 30th. Take care. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you.